I know she told you everything.
Theo said the moment I stepped out of our bedroom. First he made his way to our bed, then he laughed with my children in their nursery. I had no idea how to turn it against him until I found out about a North Carolina law almost no one knows about. Neither my wife nor her lover saw it coming. It all began on New Year's Eve. I held Nora's hand in the limousine, and it felt like the world was ours for the taking. Theo Varnell sat across from us, smiling, his words light, his compliments on Nora's earrings sincere. I saw him only as my wife's new, friendly teaching colleague. We were headed to a party at the Hilton Hotel, and the air was thick with the promise of new beginnings, the glitter of sequins and the clink of champagne glasses. Little did I know this man would soon become a regular at our dinner table, and then a threat to everything I held sacred. I didn't know my fight with him would end in court. Nora and I had been married for 12 years, 2 children, a shared home, familiar rituals, daily joys and challenges. I worked hard to provide for our family, sometimes paying for it with my absence. For me, marriage was an unbreakable fortress, something sacred in a world where the institution of family seemed to be crumbling. Nora, an experienced teacher, was assigned to mentor Theo, and I saw nothing but a professional connection. He slipped easily into our lives, dinners at our house, conversations across the table, his personal stories that created the illusion of an old friendship. I remembered Nora smiling as he helped load dishes into the dishwasher. "It's good to have friends like that," she'd said. But something began to shift. Not all at once, but gradually, like a picture slightly askew on a wall. At first it was small things. Nora became emotionally withdrawn. Her criticisms of my work hours grew sharper, a note of detachment in her voice. I tried to compensate, shifted my schedule, spent more time at home, but I felt like I was no longer reaching her. One day I came home early and found Theo in the hallway, holding one of my son's drawings. He smiled. "Your kid has talent." His tone was warm, but the moment felt staged, as if Theo had rehearsed what to say if I walked in. Another evening, Nora came home late, much later than usual. Her hair was damp, and her shirt collar was turned inside out. "Long parent-teacher conference," she mumbled, walking past me. She kissed my cheek, but her eyes didn't meet mine. I turned to the kitchen. The trash hadn't been taken out, and atop it lay a receipt. 2 entrees from a downtown bistro, one of them my usual order. I held it in my hand, alone at the kitchen table, for several minutes. That night, as I washed up, I caught a new scent in the air. Not soap, not cologne. Something softer, floral and unfamiliar. It lingered on the towel Nora had just used. I inhaled it, then slowly exhaled. Standing before the mirror, water still dripping from my chin, I quietly told my reflection, "You're thinking too much." But the mirror didn't answer. For weeks, I searched for any excuse not to follow the thread. Nora was tired. Theo was just being helpful. People change. I told myself that's how marriage worked, ebbs and flows. And hadn't I been distant myself? Long work hours, missed dinners. I wanted to believe what I felt was insecurity, not instinct. But my gut wouldn't settle. Nora began locking the bedroom door when she changed, a new habit. She no longer hummed when she cooked. She always hummed. And one evening when I offered to join her at the spring school showcase, she smiled too quickly and said, "You wouldn't like it. It's just teacher stuff." One quiet Sunday afternoon, I heard something, a ringtone I didn't recognize. It wasn't coming from Nora's phone. It buzzed again. The sound was coming from her purse, which lay at the foot of the stairs. I opened it. Beneath a travel-size bottle of hairspray lay a second phone. Smaller, older, a burner phone. Locked. When Nora appeared around the corner and saw me with it, her eyes darted to the phone, then back to my face. Her voice didn't waver. "Put that down. I didn't say a word. I placed it on the counter and walked outside, letting the door click shut behind me. The air was cold. My breath misted the glass. And in that moment between suspicion and confirmation, I understood something terrible. She was already gone. It hadn't exploded yet, but something inside our marriage had already broken, quietly, expertly, and Theo stood squarely in the middle of it. The silence surrounding that hidden phone was louder than any answer. Nora never mentioned it, and I never brought it up again. But the purse she'd left out the night before was neatly zipped and placed on a high shelf the next morning, as if something had been carefully put away. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing either. The subtle shifts continued. Nora came home later. Her stories about work grew thinner, reduced to vague generalizations. And when I casually offered to drop by the upcoming school fundraiser to help set up or staff a children's booth, she refused too quickly. "It's really just teacher stuff," she said. "It's boring." She was smiling when she said it, but her tone was clipped. That's when I first felt like a stranger in her professional world. A week later, waiting in the car line at the school, Marla, one of Nora's colleagues, spotted me and tapped on my car window. "You didn't make it to the staff party last Friday?" she asked. I looked up. Didn't know there was one. "Oh," she said, hesitating. "Nora and Theo came in late, took that corner booth at the Ridge House like they always do." "The Ridge House?" I repeated. "Yeah, they were laughing about something. Honestly, I just assumed you had arrived separately." She waved and walked off. But I sat motionless, her words dropping like a stone. The Ridge House was where Nora and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary. And now, apparently, it was their spot. That night I cooked dinner and sat across from Nora at the table while the children chattered about their day. She poured herself wine, mentioned something about a student's science project, and smiled as if nothing had changed. I smiled back. But underneath, I felt suspended between two impossible roads. If I confronted her again, really pushed, I might get the truth. But I couldn't unknow it once it was spoken. If I stayed silent, I risked becoming a passive character in my own undoing. And the worst part, I still loved her. It was a blade twisting in my chest. Later that week, we were driving home from the store in silence. Nora stared out the window. I kept my eyes on the road until I heard a short, vibrating ring from her lap. She glanced down quickly and flipped the screen side down. The screen pulsed with a soft color, one I didn't recognize. I didn't ask. I didn't even look at her. But after that night, I began to remember that specific sound, the cadence of the vibrate with chilling clarity. It wasn't what I saw. It was what she no longer wanted me to hear. When the house was quiet, I opened our cell phone account dashboard. Nora had said the spare phone was for school emergencies, gaps in coverage, she'd claimed. But there it was again, that number. The same area code, the same timestamps as the restaurant whispers. Calls. Brief. Clustered around weekends and after 10 p.m. The zip code on file matched Theo's apartment address. I didn't say anything. I just opened a folder on my desktop, the one labeled Q3 Repairs, and saved the screenshots. Quietly, methodically, as if preparing blueprints for demolition. The following week, the school held an open house. Nora told me not to worry about coming. She'd said, "It's just for my students' parents." I went anyway. I arrived early, not to help, just to observe. I stood in the back, near an unused equipment cart, as families strolled among colorful exhibits. Theo appeared shortly after, making a direct line for Nora. They stood by the science fair displays. Close. Too close. She touched his wrist, lightly, briefly. But it was a gesture I recognized, one she used to make to me once when she cared about what I was saying. Then she laughed. Not politely, not professionally. It was intimate.
Nora turned and saw me. "You didn't say you were coming," she said casually. "I thought it was just teacher stuff." A sixth grader nearby looked up and asked, "Are you her husband?" I didn't blink. I said, "Used to be." The hallway went quiet. Chairs scraped. The air shifted. Nora's lips parted, but no words came out. She walked 10 paces ahead of me to the parking lot, never looking back. And I knew. The truth was no longer just creeping. It was taking shape. And it had a name.
The final break didn't come with a shout, but with a single sentence. It was early April, a rainy Monday. I'd just finished a client call when I saw Nora's car in the driveway, earlier than usual. The lights inside were off. The house was unnaturally quiet. I stepped through the front door, calling her name. No answer, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tap of rain on the windows. I found her sitting in the dark on the edge of our bed, elbows on her knees, hands clasped. "I need to tell you something," she uttered. I didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, waiting. Nora wasn't crying. Her voice was flat, drained. "I've been seeing Theo since January." She didn't flinch, offered no excuses. I felt my hands go numb. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if gravity had shifted. "How long?" I asked, already knowing. 3 months, maybe 4, she said. "It's over now." I blinked slowly. "Why him?" I asked. Nora's answer was quiet but piercing. Because he listened, because he said the right things, because I felt seen. This was worse than rage, worse than betrayal. This was confirmation, not of the act, but of her emotional desertion. Theo hadn't seduced her. She had offered herself. I slowly sat down in the hallway, my back against the wall. My breathing was ragged. I didn't cry, didn't yell, just breathed through the impact. The connection was physical, yes, but the real damage had been emotional, gradual, like a house eaten from the inside by termites. The walls looked fine until the floor fell through. I remembered every dinner Theo had been at, every glass of wine Nora poured. Every time she'd said, "He's just a friend." I'd invited the wrecking ball through my front door myself. That New Year's Eve memory came back, like a spotlight cutting through smoke. I held Nora's hand in the limousine. Theo sat across from us, smiling, complimenting her earrings, laughing at every joke. Now I saw it differently. How Theo looked at her. How she glanced at him when she thought I wasn't looking. It hadn't started later. It had started there. And I missed it because I trusted them both. That night, the kids were at Nora's parents' house. I didn't eat dinner, didn't turn on the TV. I just sat in the living room with the lights off. The quiet wasn't total. It was filled by the tick of the wall clock, second by second. Nora was upstairs, the door closed. At one point, I heard her moving, a floorboard creak, a barely audible click of her closet door. She was packing. The house smelled of lavender from a candle she'd lit earlier, the same scent she'd light before our anniversary dinners. I watched it until it burned itself out. At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text. Theo Varnell. "She told you everything. I'm sorry it went down like this." His arrogance made my hands tremble, not what Theo said, but when. At the exact moment she closed her bedroom door upstairs, Theo texted me, as if he'd been waiting, as if they'd coordinated it. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood up, walked to the home office printer, and printed the call logs I'd saved. 2 pages, neatly highlighted. Not for confrontation, for court. The unraveling was complete. Now it was time for the reckoning. And I, for the first time in months, felt something solid return beneath my feet.
It didn't happen overnight. Justice, I learned, was slow and expensive. The first call I made was 2 weeks after Nora's confession. Not to her, not to Theo, but to an attorney named Vivian Strathmore. Her name had come up in a local article about an alienation of affection case. One phrase stuck. She makes people regret they ever stepped foot in a married home. I booked a consultation for the following Thursday. She met me in a minimalist downtown office, its walls lined with thick legal tomes and a framed quote, "Dignity is a strategy." Strathmore listened without interruption as I recounted everything. The dinners, the burner phone, the confession, the call logs, Theo's text. She took notes quietly, nodding until I finished. "You have a case," she said, closing her notepad, "and a strong one." I nodded. "I'm not doing this for the money." "You won't get any," she said, flatly. "But you'll make your point, and in this state that still matters." She slid a form across the table. "We'll file alienation of affection and criminal conversation. These are civil torts, no jail time, but a court will hear it." I looked at the document. "He laughed in my home," I said, "with my children in the next room." Strathmore looked up. "Then let's take that laugh away from him." I wasn't angry anymore. That part had passed. What replaced it was sharper, a sense of discipline, purpose. For months I had wandered in the dark, trying to preserve what was already broken. But now, for the first time, the path ahead felt linear, structured, objective. Nora had made her choice. Theo had made his. Now it was my turn. I didn't want revenge. I wanted control of the narrative. I wanted my children to know, someday, that I hadn't just let it happen. The papers were filed on August 1st. 2 days later, Theo was served at his apartment. But then, silence. Weeks passed. Then a month. No reply, no lawyer. Finally, in late September, Strathmore received a letter. Theo had decided to represent himself. "He's that arrogant?" I asked. Strathmore nodded. "Or that foolish. Either way, it's to our advantage." But privately, I wasn't so sure. Theo had always been slippery, charming, performative, the kind of person who could convince everyone he was the victim. Self-representation meant unpredictability, and unpredictability meant risk. In the evenings, I began assembling files for deposition. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by pages, emails, call records, calendar entries. I highlighted timestamps in blue, printed Theo's texts in full-size font, and meticulously labeled each folder. One night, I listened to a voicemail Nora had left me in March, the one where she said she'd be home late claiming a parent conference had run over. In the background of the message, faintly but distinctly, jazz music played. The same playlist the Ridge House used during dinner service. I sat motionless, phone in hand, the jazz seeping through the speaker like an accidental confession. At the deposition, Theo showed up in a wrinkled blazer, no tie. He smiled at me across the table, the same smile from the limousine on New Year's Eve. Strathmore started with basic questions. Theo answered confidently, even casually, until she brought up the text, the one sent at 11:42 p.m., the moment Nora closed her bedroom door upstairs. "Did you deliberately time that text message?" she asked. Theo smirked. "I thought he should know. I assumed she had told him. And you didn't think sending him a message that night might be provocative?" Theo shrugged. "It was honest." Strathmore paused. "So is this deposition. And you just gave us your closing statement." Theo looked up, suddenly uncertain. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, not with rage, but with the quiet weight of a man who had already decided what justice meant. As we walked out of the building, the rain had just begun to fall. I didn't reach for an umbrella. I let it fall on my face. Cold, clean, unrelenting. Because the storm wasn't coming. It was already here.
The verdict came down on a humid August morning. I sat motionless as the court clerk read the decision. Theo Varnell was to pay $750,000 in damages for alienation of affection and criminal conversation. There were no gasps, no dramatic outbursts in the courtroom, just the quiet, the kind that settles after a long storm. Across the way, Theo didn't flinch. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as if that meant something. But the smirk was gone. Charm wouldn't help him here. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The court's decision was public. The case was searchable. Theo's name, now forever tied to betrayal, would appear in background checks, credit reports, and late-night Google searches for years to come. In court, he had defended himself with defiance, but the transcript read like a confession. And in closing arguments, Strathmore read Theo's own words aloud, the late-night text, the smirk at the deposition. "She told you everything. I'm sorry it went down like this." It wasn't an apology. It was a weapon. And the judge treated it as such. I didn't go celebrate. Didn't text Nora. Didn't even tell my closest friends until the following week. Instead, I drove home, changed out of my suit, and picked up the kids from their first day of school. They came running, backpacks swinging, tripping over each other to tell me about lunches and new teachers. I listened, fully, present, not thinking about Theo, not even about Nora, just about the two people who still called me Dad, as if nothing had broken. Therapy helped. So did time. But it was that moment, watching them argue over whose art project looked more like a dinosaur, that reminded me I was still capable of building something stable, something honest. Theo never paid a dime, but the judgment became part of his permanent record. He lost his next job offer, a teaching position at a charter school, after a basic background check flagged the civil suit. Nora moved out of state within a year. They didn't marry, not legally. Last I heard, Theo was trying to start his own tutoring business. Online reviews mentioned him seeming distracted and overly defensive. The court didn't give me my family back, but it gave me something else. A narrative, a resolution, a public statement that I hadn't imagined it. In a world of blurred lines and hazy justifications, that clarity was rare. And for me, priceless.
One Sunday morning, months later, I stood in the kitchen, pouring pancake batter. The window was open. A light breeze stirred the curtain. The air was filled with the smell of butter, vanilla, and something that felt like peace. My daughter walked in and handed me a drawing. 3 stick figures. A sun in the corner, her name in big letters. "It's us," she said, "like before." Theo tore a family apart and thought it would pass quietly. But now, every time someone Googles his name, they find the price of his arrogance. What would you do if the person who smiled at your dinner table stole everything behind your back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ashes of betrayal?